or blocking that don't eat me signal, your T cells, your immune cells come in and eat the cancer and actually keep it under control. And when you respond, which is a significant percentage of patients, it can last for several years. And the immune system keeps surveillance and keeps that cancer down. Eventually, the cancer will change and get around it, but it buys us quality time to make new discoveries.
And so where is the future in terms of the extraordinary thing about the people that I've talked to, and immunotherapy is part of it, but it is that as they develop ways to have your own body be used as part of the attack on the cancer cells in your body, in terms of eliminating their defenses, the cancer cell defenses, as you just described. It is also the capacity, and you might have talked about this too, the capacity not just to be specialized with respect to one particular cancer, but more than one.
Yeah. It's all changing. In the 1800s, we called cancer by body part.
Right.
And now we're calling it by the on and the off switches.
Brain cancer, or it was
brain, prostate, lung,
right,
you name it. Now it's the on and the off switches.
Right.
In Walter Isaacson's book about Steve Jobs, he called it something beautiful, jumping lily pad to lily pad. Every time we identified a target through sequencing on Steve's cancer, we gave him a drug. He was safe on a lily pad. When the cancer progressed, he was swimming again in the pond. And it was a beautiful way of describing these technologies. And the hope is we can discover more and more of these lily pads, if you will. There's several dozen of these drugs, the target on switches, and more literally coming, as we say. That being said, we're certainly not winning the war on cancer. I don't mean to be totally optimistic here, but there is hope.
What do we need to do to win the war on cancer?
I think we need to think a little bit differently. Right now, we're targeting this cell and the cancer cell. We don't target the system and change it. When you drop a match after it rains, nothing happens. When you drop a match in Los Angeles, it goes up in flames. So an amazing study was done earlier this year where they looked at the eyelid. The eyelid is the only place in the body you don't put sunscreen. And what they showed in 100 people is almost all of the changes of cancer in the cells of the eyelid, yet there was no cancer because it wasn't a receptive environment. So one of the futures of cancer will be changing the environment. If you take a woman with breast cancer, and after treatment, you give her a drug that builds bone for osteoporosis, you reduce recurrence of the cancer by 40%. Breast cancer metastasizes to bone, you change the soil, the seed doesn't grow. And so it's a radically different way of approaching cancer that I think is going to happen more and more often, which is changing that system.
Okay, tell me about the eyelid thing again, because I've heard about that before.
It's awesome. Is that the eyelid is the one place you don't put sunscreen, right. So the UV radiation causes damage. Right. And if I sequence your eyelids today, I would find all of the DNA changes of cancer there, yet you don't have cancer. Because
why is that?
Because you need to have DNA changes, but you also need an environment that allows the cancer to grow. To me, cancer is a verb, not a noun. You're cancering. You don't get cancer, you have cancer. And so the body, it's a process it's going through. If I sequence your blood, or 100 people in New York City today, I would find that 7 of them had all the changes of leukemia in their blood, yet they don't have leukemia, because the environment didn't allow it to grow. So you need DNA changes and a permissive environment. All of our therapy has been here. The next generation, I think, will target it here. Why do drugs like aspirin and statins prevent cancer? Probably because they change that system.
And are there other drugs out there in the pipeline that might change the system even more?
I hope. An amazing discovery happened earlier this year with elephants. You say, why elephants? Elephants are 40 times bigger than you or I, yet they get almost no cancer. And so when you look at an elephant, the mothers give birth to children until age 60. The fathers live until 70. Until the day they die, they actually protect the pack of elephants. And so they developed a way not to get cancer, a gene called P53 that you and I have 1 copy of, and that what corrects DNA, they have 20 copies of. Evolutionarily, after age 30, they don't need us anymore, right? We had our children, we just take housing and resources, etc. So the elephant evolved a way not to get cancer so they can continue to have children and protect the herd. We haven't done that. So we're not going to wait a million years. Well, we're not going to wait a million years, but we're going to try to take this outlier effect, and we're going to try to learn from it so we can prevent cancer better in you and I.
Let's talk about gene editing, too.
It's real. Earlier this year...
What do we mean when we say gene editing?
There's a molecule called CRISPR, C-R-I-S-P-R, that can go in and change 1 of the 3 billion letters of DNA. And it's enormous power. Earlier this year, they took mosquitoes and made them malaria resistant so that they can become the dominant population and could eventually just get rid of malaria by changing the mosquito. You can change, if you and I have defect in a gene that gives us breast cancer or any other gene, we can potentially change it so our children don't get it. We can re-engineer a T cell to attack a cancer or another disease within our body. So we now have the ability in a reliable
Is that what
way.
James Allison did, re-engineered T cells?
Well, he did it in a different way. It was the group at Penn do it in a very different way as they took a receptor and they put it onto a T cell to attack it. This is a way to basically scale what they're doing in a very powerful way. And it's exciting.
And what will hold it back? What will restrain it?
Well, there's a lot of talk now of National Academy of Sciences and others because in China they changed an embryo with this technology that we should regulate it and we should restrict its uses. So I think that will be one area.
Besides how to regulate it.
That's the key question. There's no body in the world, in the United States or the world, whose job it is to regulate these things. And as technology happens in our place, bang, 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 we need to think about that. We need to think about the ethics, the legal, etc. You know, I wrote a piece in the New York Times several years ago when Angelina Jolie said, I have the breast cancer gene, that a company was out there charging $6,000 for a test. And it was basically predatory practice and monopolistic in a sense. And that you had to pay $6,000 to look at your own DNA. And it was a wild concept at the time that many women couldn't do it because they couldn't afford to pay to look at their own DNA. Well, several months later, Clarence Thomas and the Supreme Court said you could no longer patent a gene in our country. And they pat themselves on the back. But for 12 years before that, what about all those women who couldn't be tested and all the lives lost? What happened is technology is happening so quickly, the legal system, the ethics, taking a long time to catch up in these lucky years.
If you look at all the possibilities, how far off are we where you can take any organ of the body and regrow parts of it through stem cell?
I think we're at the beginning of a stem cell explosion. You can
just to
yes.
you know you and I just talked about immunotherapy. You know, we just talked about gene editing. All those things are just taking off too.
Yes. And
go ahead.
Immunotherapy is here. Their drugs FDA approved on it, so it's taking off, but it's real and happening today. CRISPR, gene editing is still in its evolution. Certainly 3D printing organs, stem cells, it's happened. There's a girl with a bladder, it's been in place for several years, that was 3D printed through her own stem cells. And so we're certainly getting better at doing that now. I think, you know, the stem cell technology would take off. More complex organs haven't been done yet, but probably will. But
how far has it been done so far?
It's been done in very simple things like a bladder and skin. So those are very simple organs compared to a kidney or a heart, etc. It will happen in heart valves relatively soon, and hopefully
Relatively soon, meaning
the next year or two.
Really?
Yes. But
Stem cell can
stem cell can become anything. So you can differentiate it in a tissue.
So it can become your heart valve.
Yes.
It can become a mitral valve.
Well,
it
you
can
can
become
3D print it in the shape of a mitral valve.
Yeah.
But I think the real technology...
That's within a year or two?
Yes. I think the real breakthrough will be this, is that in the 1950s, this woman named Wanda Lunsford did an experiment where she took an old rat and a young rat, and she tied their skin together. So the blood supplies joined, and 3 weeks later she looked. The brain had new neurons in the old rat, the white hair turned brown again, new muscles, the heart beat better. She claimed she reversed aging. It was the only paper she ever published. Well, earlier this year in Harvard, Stanford, and UCSF, they repeated it, and it worked. And what they showed...
How long ago did she do it?
1953.
Wow. What's her name?
Wanda Ruth Lunsford.
And who was she affiliated
She
with?
was affiliated with Columbia University, published in National Academy of Sciences.
Wanda Lunsford.
Yes.
In the 50s.
1950s, yeah.
And now, last year at Harvard.
Harvard, Stanford, and UCSF, they did it, and it worked.
And what worked was they took the rats.
They took the rats, or the mice in this case, and they gave plasma, which are the proteins in the blood, from a young mouse to an old one. And what they showed is stem cells go to sleep at a certain age. Yeah. And these proteins wake up the stem cells so they can make new neurons in the brain. They can make the heart beat better. They can make the muscles stronger. And so what's exciting is we're never going to live till 130 or 140.
Why not?
Well, because because I think there's general engineering failure in the body. I don't think we're at that point where we can re-engineer the whole body.
Wait. If there's general engineering failure, that means that organs are failing. And
Yes.
you just said that we can, create cells that create tissue that create organs.
Yes, and I think
And so
that...
therefore you're defeating the thing that kills us, which is disease that causes our heart and our lungs.
Yeah, I think in the short run, what we're going to do is make us live quality years till our 90s or 100. Will we go longer than that with these technologies? You're probably right. The sky's the limit there, but probably not within our lifetimes. But I think within our lifetime, we're going to be able to make the eighth, the ninth, the 10th decade quality with a technology like this.
What is it they have to overcome? In other words, is it some kind of adverse reaction to all this?
No, they need to identify the individual proteins. We're never going to give blood from young people or plasma for young people. We're going to identify the 2, 3, 4 proteins that do this and then give them a shot. Just like a diabetic gets insulin, if you break your leg and you're 70, you'll get a shot and you'll heal quicker.
Wow.
And so that's going to be on the horizon, is unleash the potential for cure within you. That's exciting.
I don't think
it's your
we
own
can
stem
spend.
cells.
I don't think we can spend too much money on any of this.
Well, this is the problem I have with our research system in the United States. Ideas like this are great, but it's a tiny fraction of our budget is spent on it.
I know. That's my point.
We've talked before, inflammation, the root of heart disease, cancer, etc. Who's discovering new ways of measuring inflammation? Almost none. We're not setting a priority of what we need. We're setting a priority of the questions that scientists have. And I love science for science sake, but at some point also we need a hierarchy of what the world needs.
I want to talk about the things that could go wrong,
Yes.
all right, before we go. Let's talk about gene editing, for example. There's a real concern that if you start screwing around with the genetic code and start taking genes out and start editing genes, you don't know